Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 401 for the 26th of June 2016. Richard Saunders here with you from a very chilly, coldest day of the year, according to the reports, a very chilly Sydney, Australia. What an interesting week I've had, my friends. What an interesting week I had. I sat in, sort of helping out to produce the first recording of a new podcast. And I don't know what it's called yet, mainly because it hasn't got a name. And hosted by my sisters. Good on them. I can't wait to tell you more about my sisters' podcast. And more or less, I think they're going to be interviewing local women of note. And I'm sure you'll forgive me when the time comes that I give that podcast a little bit of publicity. Coming up on the Skeptic Zone this week, what do we have for you? We have an interview with Michelle Franklin from the Darwin Skeptics. Now, we spoke to Michelle last year. We're going to catch up with her, see how the group is going, and discuss her recent appearance on radio. And I was delighted that the radio, whenever possible, contact local skeptical groups to ask them about skeptical topics. And this one is a perennial one up in the Northern Territory, up in Darwin, the top end of Australia, all about a poltergeist. Or at least the claims of a poltergeist. Poltergeist activity, spooky goings-on. And we'll also play a little clip of Michelle on the radio. And well done, Michelle. I was very pleased to hear that. Coming up after that, we have an interview conducted by Heidi Robertson, the Raw Skeptic from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. Heidi is going to be speaking to Tracey, a member of the Facebook group Stop the AVN, Stop the Australian Vaccination Network, or Stop the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network. It gets a bit confusing with all these letters flying around. But what this interview will demonstrate to you clearly is how a Facebook group of concerned citizens can really, and I mean really, make a difference. Tracey will explain the impact this Facebook group has had on the anti-vaccination crowd. An inspiration and a lesson for us all, I think. And following that, a look at Carl Sagan's Baloney detection kit. Now, you may have heard about this, the Baloney detection kit. Well, I'll read out some of the points Carl Sagan was making to do with this baloney detection kit. I like that word, baloney. Then to round off the show, guest reporter Kevin Davies from Canberra in the Australian Capital Territory. We're going from one Australian territory to another this episode. He will interview Dr. Will Grant from the Centre for the Public Awareness of Science at the Australian National University. Oh, I wish I could just jump on the next plane and fly down to visit some of these talks. Now, I'm very pleased to announce that the Skeptic Zone has now a Patreon account. If you want to contribute to the Skeptic Zone, if you feel like you enjoy the show and you want to show your support, visit www.skepticzone.tv. The link is right up the top, and you can be a Patreon member, and there are some rewards. Oh, yes. If you contribute a certain amount a month, over a certain amount a month, I will send you some goodies, some lovely things, autographed things by James Randi and some other bits and pieces. Have a look. Go to skepticzone.tv, click the link for being a patron. Every cent that you send in helps support the Skeptic Zone and keeps it on air or on the internet. And in fact, of course, as you know, it's only due to people like you who already chip in via PayPal, micropayments, that the show exists at all. Now, it was interesting, of course, to see the news the last few days of the Brexit. Britain deciding to leave the EU. A result I don't think many people were predicting at all. And this foreshadows a story I'll be covering probably towards the end of the year. To do with predictions. Every year I collect the magazine from the psychics in Australia, which lists the top prediction for the coming year by Australia's top psychics. And just perusing it before with the news of this split in the EU and the terrible gun massacre in the United States a few weeks back, oddly enough, neither of those get a mention. Can't explain that. Well, yes, I can, but we'll get to that later in the year. So far, over the last 10 years of me collecting this magazine and collating their predictions and analysing them, my estimate so far is they get about 95% wrong. Well, that's enough for me at the moment. I'm going to run downstairs and have a bologna sandwich. Why not? With a bit of mustard. While I'm doing that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Joining me now all the way from Darwin in the Northern Territory, right up there. I think it's in the tropics or very close to the tropics. I'm sure Michelle Franklin can tell me. It's Michelle. Hello.
Hi, how you going?
I'm really well. Is Darwin actually in the tropics?
There's a debate on that.
Oh, really?
The official, the line of Capricorn that says north of here is tropical is south of us, so we are above the tropical line, but I also read a definition that anywhere that gets below 20 degrees ever is subtropical, and occasionally on a really cold night we will drop below 20.
On a really cold night.
It doesn't happen very often. Well, actually, the last 2 or 3 days have dropped below 20 overnight, so it's been pretty cold by our standards. Pretty cold.
Darwin, of course, named after Charles Darwin, which is interesting because as a complete sidetrack to why we're actually chatting today, I remember, and for the benefit of those listeners around the world who may not know this, because it was a long time ago, Christmas Eve, I think, 1974, a big cyclone came through and just devastated Darwin. And there was talk at the time, I seem to remember since, that was because the city was named after Charles Darwin and God was showing his displeasure.
Oh, okay. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, there you go. Anyway, we haven't spoken for a while. The last time you were on the Skeptic Zone was the 30th of August last year when the Darwin Skeptics were sort of getting going. How are the Darwin Skeptics doing?
We're still getting going. We've had a fair bit of activity on the Facebook group, which has been good. We've got 91 members on Facebook now. I think more than half of them are actually in Darwin, so that's good. There's a fair few who aren't, but no, we've got a nice little group happening. We've got quite a bit of activity on the group, so we've got lots of people who are participating in conversations and keen to come out and meet up, so it's going really well.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that any group, any skeptical group around the world has a presence and is doing something and not just sitting back on their warm couch or your cool couch in Darwin, maybe with a cold drink and not doing anything. But the other reason I wanted to chat to you today was you were on ABC radio in Darwin just last week, in fact. You got quite a long interview, I thought, and it was all about, believe it or not, and yes, it's still the 21st century and we're still talking about these things, poltergeists.
Yeah, the same old Humpty-Doo poltergeist from back in the 90s. It just won't go away.
Well, maybe that's the nature of poltergeists. I don't know. For the benefit of our listeners, could you give a little recap of this whole silly story?
Okay, so it started in about 1998, I think. There was a story of 5 people living in a little house in Humpty-Doo who were being harassed by a poltergeist. They got attention all over Australia, and I think there was international interest in this poltergeist that was throwing rocks around and writing words in pebbles and basically making a nuisance of itself. Nobody was hurt, but there were just lots of strange occurrences. Channel 7 came up from Perth and did a big story. I think it was from Perth. Made headlines around Australia and got them lots of attention. I think they made a bit of money off it. A lot of publicity for the new Channel 7 that had just started up in Darwin. So there's lots of theories about motivations there. They completely banned the Darwin, because there was a different Darwin Skeptics back then, a group of people who were keen to investigate, but they were completely barred from participating until all of it was over, so they didn't actually get to see anything happen. there were lots of news reporters that came in, so lots of newspaper reporters and various radio stations and things came in, and a lot of them claimed to have seen the strange things happening. The evidence that was actually documented was fairly sketchy. There were a few videos of some things flying around the room. One video that showed a woman throwing one of those things, which I think turned it all into a bit of a joke at the end.
Yeah.
But lots of first-person accounts of people who swear it couldn't have been faked.
Of course. And it was really interesting to hear you being interviewed just the other week on the radio, because they also interviewed, I think, a Catholic priest, but they also interviewed a so-called researcher, and I'll use the air quotes here on the camera to you, who was putting the case that how can these things be faked, or there are so many reports over the years which he's collated, going back centuries, how can all these people be wrong? But the bits I've seen, and I remember seeing the video report at the time on TV, it's a pity we don't have a copy of that, it's very hard to find, they were clearly it was just a joke, because as soon as the camera looked in one direction, something would fly from the other where the camera wasn't facing. But I was very pleased to hear that they gave you a really good run on the radio. But that must have been an interesting experience. It's not that easy to be interviewed on radio.
It was surprisingly well handled from their point. They approached me, they asked for my perspective, and she basically just asked me the questions, let me say my piece, and just played whatever I said. She was very, very accommodating and very interested. And I think she wouldn't let on the show, but I think she was pretty much on our side, because we had a good laugh about it while we were talking before and after. Yeah, she seemed to be enjoying the whole thing. She said it was all just for a bit of fun, and you know, you heard on the show that she played Thriller and Ghostbusters, and she had that funny little intro with the spooky voice. So yeah, she was turning it all into a bit of a fun afternoon. So I think it was handled very well, and I like that she let Father Tom was the priest. She let him go for a while, and then she let Tony come in and do his long spiel, and then she saved me for last. So I thought that was a nice little way to end it up, I thought.
What we'll do now, we can't play the whole thing, but what we'll do now is I'll play a short clip from you on the radio program to give people an idea.
And I really love the idea of the Darwin Skeptics. What exactly is a skeptic?
Basically somebody who wants to find the truth. So we go into a situation not knowing what the answer is, and we want to know the truth of the situation. We don't want to confirm any preconceived beliefs. We just want to know what's actually happening. So we look for evidence, and we're open to the possibility that whatever we think is wrong. We have to accept that in our lives, at least some of the time, we are going to be wrong. So a skeptic's goal is to be less wrong, or to be wrong less often. So to do that, you need to learn how to recognise when you are wrong, so that you don't become dogmatic about something that you believe, so that you don't start dismissing evidence and holding on to some preconceived notion. You have to always look at the evidence, find what the evidence actually says, and be willing to change your mind when that evidence shows that probably the ghosts aren't real. You have to sort of change your view and say, all right, whatever I saw probably wasn't. Or if you find some really irrefutable evidence that shows that ghosts are real, then you have to be willing to change your mind and say that that is what happened. So it just basically means you have to go with whatever the evidence shows.
Have you always been a skeptic?
I've not always known what a skeptic was. When I was younger, I always thought that skeptic and cynic were the same thing, which obviously they're not. Cynic is somebody who wants things to be not true and wants to prove things wrong, and that's not what a skeptic is. But I think I always have been, because I've always loved science, and I've always questioned things, and I've always wondered about things. There was a time when I believed in, that aliens built the pyramids on Mars and things like that. As soon as I saw evidence and read, the reasoned arguments for and against, I always changed my mind. So I think that means I always was a skeptic. I just didn't always have the evidence at hand when I used to believe strange things.
Yes, well, I thought you came across very well as I was listening in online here in Sydney when you were on Darwin Radio.
And I heard her read out your tweet. That was very well placed.
That's right. Well, it was a Facebook. I was commenting as I was listening. And my comment, when the paranormal guy was speaking, I think my comment was, things just don't fly, stones, pebbles, pens, whatever, just don't fly around rooms of their own accord. You have to look at the physics of it. Assuming something has flown across a room, well, there must be a force acting upon it. I like to do that, bring in the physics. Was somebody blowing hard? Was there somebody throwing it? What other force can describe something flying around a room? We just can't say a spirit moved it.
You mentioned in your tweet, and she then spoke about the theory about placing things on ceiling fans, and then as the fans speed up and they pick up momentum, the items fly off. But I was with a friend at the time listening to the radio show, and he lived in Darwin at the time. He lived in Humpty Doo at the time, so he remembers it quite well. And he said the conversation at the time was that they had put mud on the top of the ceiling fans and anchored the objects with the mud, and then as the mud dried out, it lost its stickiness.
Yeah.
And that's why they would come off hours after, and there was nobody there at the time, which sounds like a very reasonable way to have done it.
Yes, I remember that theory at the time, although what I heard was it was possibly sticky tape, and things were taped just loosely on, and as the fan picked up momentum, the rocks and so forth would be flung off. Thinking about it now, what a dangerous thing to do, because
I reckon
having rocks fly off a fan, who knows where they're going to do or what they're going to hit. So that seems a pretty silly thing to do. And that
kind of works in their favour as well. Like if I was that woman who was there all the time with, a toddler in the house, I wouldn't be sticking knives to fans and letting my toddler wander around in the house. Yeah. Which makes me wonder if, maybe it wasn't her, maybe, I don't know.
Again, yes, of course, there's still a lot of mystery revolving around it.
But then again, if I honestly believed there was a ghost in the house, I probably wouldn't keep my toddler there either.
That's right. But it's sort of now part of the Northern Territory folklore, isn't it? The Humpty Doo poltergeist. And I guess it's looked fondly like the Loch Ness Monster. I don't think too many people take it seriously, although the paranormal researcher who was interviewed seemed to take it very seriously indeed.
Yeah, he was very convinced that he was right, and very convinced that all the evidence that he saw worked in his favour. Like the fact that the cameras didn't catch anything was proof that ghosts don't like cameras. Take note, skeptics.
Now, I've heard that argument before. At a paranormal convention I went to a couple of years ago, they said, and it's interesting to note the poltergeists didn't operate in rooms with cameras. I'm thinking, you have to be kidding me.
He said it was almost like the poltergeist was playing a trick on us. Every time we pointed a camera in one direction, the object would come from the other direction. From another.
There you go. It must be all true.
Yes, somebody was playing a trick on you, and I'm sure it was the poltergeist.
Well, Michelle, listen, thank you very much for this little update, and well done going on the radio. And I thought you did very well because you brought up things like Occam's razor and Hitchens' razor to talk to the people. So I hope they invite you back. When
I finished on the radio, I told a few of my friends to listen in. I texted a bunch of people and said, hey, tune in at 3:00. I'm going to be on the radio. And a few of my friends didn't realise that I was a skeptic. It's just not something that we'd talked about before. So a few of them had a bit of a laugh about it. And a few of them said, don't come to my house. You won't be a skeptic anymore. So all right, well, I'd like to come to your house. Show me what you've got. Yeah. But one in particular said she listened to the show and she sat down with her notebook and she wrote down all of these little things she was going to tell me. And as Father Tom and as Tony, the author, were talking, she was making all these notes about things to tell me. And then when she got to the bit where I was on, and I gave her a couple of tools. So I gave her Occam's razor and then I gave her Hitchens' razor, and I said, This is how you assess what you've seen or assess the claims that have been made. And she thought about them and she said there was nothing on her list that was worth telling me because neither of them passed those two tests.
Oh, boy.
So I thought that was very good. She said she's going to go back and have a look at these things again and see if she can find a better way to present them to me. So I thought that was a nice little win there.
That's great. Anytime a skeptic can get on the radio and put the skeptical point of views to a wider audience, I think it's well worth it. And again, I thought you came across very well. It's a pity, folks, we can't play you the whole interview. But Michelle, once again, thank you very much. And how can people contact the Darwin Skeptics?
Best way is through our Facebook group. So we have just a group called Darwin Skeptics. We've got 91 members at the moment, but a lot of them aren't actually in Darwin. So anybody who wants to join in and participate, we'd love to have you there. And if anybody's passing through Darwin or planning to be here anytime, let us know and we can plan a little meet-up and get you involved as well.
That's fantastic. Well, all the best again. I hope we can catch up and have a chat soon with more good news. But for now, Michelle Franklin, all the way from Darwin in the Northern Territory. Folks, Google it on Google Earth or Google Maps. You can see where that is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Greetings, listeners. It's me, Captain Disillusion. On my YouTube channel called Captain Disillusion, I, Captain Disillusion, analyze viral videos of the strange and unbelievable. I explain how interframe video compression, 3D motion tracking, and stock VFX elements prove that Justin Bieber is not a secret reptilian alien, that those videos of ghost cars are just unintentional optical illusions, and that lightning did not strike a few feet away from a girl on a beach as we saw in the news. I'm real fun at parties. My best friend is a lens flare.
Eat a dimmer switch, Disillusion.
I do know other people. Sometimes they even show up in my videos. People like Skepticism's grandpa, James Randi, Cirque du Soleil acrobat Erica Lins, weight loss enthusiast Penn Jillette, and the actual Beekman from Beekman's World. I hope you'll check out my adventures, interact with me in a platonic way, and even consider becoming a patron of my work. You can do all that and more on YouTube or at CaptainDisillusion.com.
It's the Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robertson.
Hello everyone. Listeners of the Skeptic Zone would be quite familiar with the AVSN, or the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, and also SAVN, Stop the Australian Vaccination Network, a Facebook group dedicated to, you guessed it, stopping the AVSN. Today I'm here via Skype with Tracey, who is a member of SAVN and has been very active in her advocacy for vaccination. Firstly, Tracey, can you tell the listeners a bit about yourself and how you came to be involved in vaccine advocacy? Why is it so important to you?
Well, I work with children, so immunisation is an important factor in that I prefer to work with immunised children and I immunise myself in order to protect them. And in about 2011, probably 2 years after Stop the AVN was formed, I stumbled across the idea that people are against vaccination, and that led me to Stop the AVN. And I've been getting involved and learning about it all ever since. It's inspired me to go to uni, and I'm studying a public health degree as a result now. It's become a real passion and a real interest and something that I do as much as I can.
You've had a good 5 years of being active with the advocacy that you've been doing, and you were actually representing SAVN last week at the 15th National Immunisation Conference. I believe you presented 2 poster presentations there. So as far as the first one goes, what was the title of that and who were the authors on it?
The title was Evidence Suggests the Fall of the Professional Anti-Vaccination Movement in Australia. That was put together by myself, Joanne Benamu, Rachel Dunlop, Anne Cody and David Hawkes. And that talked about the impact that SAVN has had on the finances of the AVSN, all these letters. It gets a bit tricky.
So as far as the finances go with AVSN, where were they getting their money from and how much were they bringing in?
They probably had 3 main streams of income. One was membership, which chiropractors were a huge membership base for them, professional memberships that were quite expensive, and other alternative medicine practitioners. So aside from membership, there was donations. They quite often ran fundraising drives for certain issues that they never spent the money on those issues anyway, but it filled the bank account up. They were selling a magazine as well, which is now defunct, and people who've paid for that magazine haven't ended up with their magazines in the end. So that was their main three streams of income, I think. And in terms of the impact of Stop the AVN on that, there's been, over the time Stop the AVN has been working on them, the income has decreased 92%. So I guess to put that into context, there were years where they were making about $280,000 to $300,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah, and the last financial records we were able to get a hold of for 2014, they were down to $21,000 for that year. So that's quite an impact.
That's a big impact. How did you measure that, and how did Stop the AVN achieve that result?
I'm really grateful to Dave Hawkes, who did all the analysis of that. Throughout the years, through Freedom of Information requests, because AVSN are an incorporated association, we were able to get their financial records through Freedom of Information. So each year after their financial records are lodged, someone makes an application to get them, and then we examine them. So that's how we got all the details. And then Dave went through and analysed it all, and he figured out the 92% decrease figure. I guess essentially it's been achieved by countering their misinformation, making the public aware of the dishonesty in their financial dealings, pushing them out of the popular media and stuff like that as well, and reducing their impact.
You were saying before that some of the donations, they were asking for donations, and some of those projects never sort of came to fruition for the people that donated. Has there been any reaction from the members about where their money has gone?
No, they don't seem to care. They're happy to hand their money over, and look, I don't know whether they get distracted or they don't care where the money ends up in the end. They just feel like they're giving it to a worthy cause, but I'm not aware that there's ever been any pushback from the members about where the income goes.
I guess that's a little bit surprising. I think, well, just speaking for myself, if I was to donate money to a specific cause that I felt passionately about, I'd want to know that my money was going where I was assured that it was going to go.
Yeah, so would I.
Well, there you go. I'm not sure we can explain that. What else was in that first poster presentation? I think you covered the Stop 10-penny campaign as well. Is that right, in that first poster?
Yeah, we did cover the Stop 10-penny campaign.
Just remind us of who Sherry Tenpenny is for those who may not know. And yes, and why there was a campaign to stop her from coming here to Australia.
Yeah, so she's a professional anti-vaccine campaigner in America, and she's quite popular over there and has a lot of followers. Stephanie Messenger, who's an Australian anti-vaccine campaigner that some people might be familiar with, organised with Sherry Tenpenny to come over here and do a tour that was seminars and dinners and things.
Yes, Stephanie Messenger was the author of Melanie's Marvellous Measles.
Yeah, so word got out that there was a tour planned. The usual suspects like Stop the AVN folks and some skeptics and that swung into action and started the Stop 10-penny campaign. And what was really great to see about that campaign is just the general public jumped on board and got involved. People that we'd never heard of before, that weren't involved with what we've been doing for so long. General community members stood up and said, no, we're not going to take this. You're not welcome here to spread your misinformation. And it took about 22 days or so from the news getting out to the point where the tour was cancelled.
Is that right? No, it was only a matter of weeks. That's amazing. And as far as the other poster that you presented, I believe that was about false balance in the media. Can you firstly explain for listeners who may not know, what is false balance?
Well, the false balance is something that Rachel Dunlop has taken a real interest in and been really proactive in, and she's, I guess, taught everyone else to follow her lead on this. But False balance it's a media bias where journalists, if they're doing a story, they feel that they need to have both sides of that story presented. And the thing is with things like immunisation, as we said before, there's no debate, there's no other side of the story. There's really no reason for having an anti-vaccine view in a vaccine story. That used to happen quite a lot.
Who were the people that news outlets and TV stations and radio stations and newspapers, who were the people that they were getting on to so-called balance the view of the immunisation experts?
Okay, well, probably the most common one would have been Meryl Dorey, of course.
And what are her qualifications again? Let's just recap that.
Her qualifications, she knows how to use Google.
Okay. I guess that's at the heart of what false balance is, isn't it? It's putting an expert like a paediatric infectious diseases specialist up against an anti-vaccination advocate with no qualifications in the field at all.
To the uninitiated observer, that kind of looks as though there's genuine division in the community about the issue, and we know that there's not. A lot of the stuff that Rachel has looked at around false balance, there's been studies done that actually show that having those two unequal sides in a story is actually more damaging to attitudes than having an anti-vaccine story on its own.
Yes, and do you think Stop the AVN has had a measurable impact on how the media handles false balance with regards vaccination stories?
I do. I'm not one of the people who speaks in the media about vaccination, but there's a few who do. What they do is when contacted by some media, they actually ask them what's the angle or the theme of the segment, whether they're going to have an anti-vaccine person on as well. If they're told that, yes, say, for example, we've got Meryl Dorey on or we've got, some other anti-vaccine view on, well, then the Stop the AVN people just decline, but explain why. Explain that it's harmful to do those kind of stories and provide them with some evidence and provide them with the public health warning against the AVN and stuff like that. So rather than just decline, they explain the reasoning behind it, and that's actually been quite successful.
And so what is the general response from journalists who are then faced with a Stop the AVN member? Or in fact, I've done it before myself for NRVS. I've said, no, we will not appear alongside anti-vaccination advocates. But from your experience and what you've presented in the poster, what has the experience with journalists been when faced with that?
Look, I think early on they weren't too sure about that. But as time has gone on, people really embrace the idea, and quite a few have implemented an unofficial policy of not having anti-vaccine advocates on. The project on Channel 10 are particularly good with that.
That's right. Dr. Rachel's been on that show a number of times as well, probably had a bit to do with that informal policy of theirs.
I think she was integral in their informal policy, yeah. They have her on a lot, and they never have anyone on for the so-called other side. And there was actually an incident early on where Meryl Dorey was going to be interviewed, and through talking to some Stop the AVN representatives, the media outlet diverted their truck from going to Meryl Dorey to going to interview a mother whose children had been affected by vaccine-preventable disease in that same area with the low vaccination rate. So once you explain to them and they understand, particularly now, they're very good at taking that on board and doing responsible stories.
And just tell us the segment in the second poster about the Media Watch segment. What was all that about?
With the ABC, in the past, they've interviewed professional anti-vaccine advocates in immunisation stories. As a result, they're broadcasting misleading content. So there's been complaints to the ABC Audience and Consumer Affairs, and a lot of those have been upheld. And then there was a story on Media Watch in which the host actually said, to put it bluntly, there's evidence and there's bull dust. It's a journalist's job to distinguish between them, not sit on the fence and bleat balance, especially when people's health is at risk.
To put it bluntly, there's evidence and there's bull dust. It's a journalist's job to distinguish between them, not to sit on the fence and bleat balance, especially when people's health is at risk.
That has been a bit of a turning point as well, that little report on Media Watch. It's almost as though it put other media outlets on notice that, you know, if you keep doing this, you're going to end up on Media Watch.
It was quite blunt, that comment by Media Watch, but very accurate.
It is, it certainly is.
Okay, Tracey, well, thank you so much for your time. And if listeners haven't yet come across Stop the AVN, have a look for them on Facebook and see you can scroll down the posts and see some of the great advocacy work that they're doing. Tracey, keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
On ending this recording, Tracey and I chatted a little bit more, and she pointed out quite rightly that we should send a shout out to all the members of Stop the AVN and similar groups who are contributing every day to stopping the flow of misinformation put out by the anti-vaccination movement. Every voice counts, and every time someone speaks out, it gives others courage to do so as well. This has been Heidi Robertson from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters. Till next time.
Hej svenska skeptiker! Du vet väl att vetenskap och folkbildning inte bara är trogna anhängare av The Skeptic Zone utan också arrangerar föredrag, pop science quiz och skeptikerträffar runt om i Sverige. Gå in på www.vof.se för att spana in vad våra 7 olika lokalföreningar runt om i landet har på gång. Och om du bor i en stad där det inte finns någon lokalförening, varför inte starta en själv? Jag pratar med dig, Umeå. Hello all skeptics in Sweden! I'm sure you already know that the Swedish Skeptics Association not only is a big fan of the Skeptic Zone, but that we also organize lectures, pop science quiz and skeptics in the pub all over the country. Go to www.vof.se to see what our 7 local chapters are up to. And if you live in a place where there is no local chapter, why not start one yourself? I'm talking to you, Umeå.
Sagan's Baloney detection kit. If, like me, you have been heavily influenced by the works of Carl Sagan, especially the Cosmos TV series, and his books including The Demon-Haunted World, you'd be familiar with the Baloney detection kit or the fine art of baloney detection. Here are some of the points Carl Sagan made from The Demon-Haunted World as reproduced at Skeptical Science. That's skeptical-science.com. Carl Sagan's Baloney detection kit, to be used when faced with ideas or wild claims. Number 1. Whenever possible, there must be independent confirmation of the facts. 2. Encourage substantive debate on the evidence by knowledgeable proponents of all points of view. 3. Arguments from authority carry little weight. Quote, authorities, end quote, have made mistakes in the past. They will do again in the future. Perhaps a better way to say it is that in science there are no authorities. At most, there are experts. 4. Spin more than one hypothesis. If there's something to be explained, think of all the different ways in which it could be explained. Then think of a test by which you might systematically disprove each of the alternatives. What survives, the hypothesis that resists this proof in this Darwinian selection among, quote, multiple working hypotheses, end quote, has a much better chance of being the right answer than if you had simply run with the first idea that caught your fancy. 5. Try not to get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours. It's only a way station in the pursuit of knowledge. Ask yourself why you like the idea. Compare it fairly with the alternatives. See if you can find reasons for rejecting it. If you don't, others will. 6. Quantify. If whatever it is you're explaining has some measure, some numerical quantity attached to it, you'll be much better able to discriminate among competing hypotheses. What is vague and qualitative is open to many explanations. Of course, there are truths to be sought in many qualitative issues we are obliged to confront, but finding them is more challenging. 7. If there's a chain of argument, then every link in the chain must work, including the premise, not just most of them. 8. Occam's razor. This convenient rule of thumb urges us, when faced with two hypotheses that explain the data equally well, to choose the simpler. 9. Always ask whether the hypothesis can be, at least in principle, falsified. Propositions that are untestable, unfalsifiable, are not worth much. Consider the grand idea that our universe and everything in it is just an elementary particle, an electron, say, in a much bigger cosmos. But if we can never acquire information from outside our universe, is not the idea incapable of disproof? You must be able to check assertions out. Inveterate skeptics must be given the chance to follow your reasoning, to duplicate your experiments, and to see if they get the same result. And that look at Carl Sagan's Baloney detection kit comes to us from Skeptical Science. That's skeptical-science.com.
On maynard.com.au. AU! What's that stain you can't explain? It's Bunga Bunga. With Maynard and
Tim Ferguson.
Episode 29. Just call it. Tim, the election is growing quite close. We're here at Cafe Frou Frou, and a lot of people have been talking about the major topic that we are facing in the Australian election. The population is facing the question, should the new national anthem be Da 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 by Trio? Da Da Da. Or My Old Man's a Dustman?
Oh, my old man's a dustman.
Look, I've got to go Da Da Da. It's got the right feel. It's got the best lyrics. Who can't get their heads around those lyrics? Even I can remember them. Da, da, da. Da, da, da. And it's got a good message to the rest of the world.
Of course, you're listening to Bunga Bunga 29, your official Dad's Arby 2016 podcast. But unfortunately, that movie's gone straight to DVD, Tim.
Straight to Netflix. That's going to be the latest way those things are spoken about.
We're here for a huge show for Bunga Bunga 29. On today's show, you'll hear some news.
That's his opinion, and he is entitled to it.
You'll hear some crank mail.
Do you get the crank mail?
No.
There'll be a sound effect solo. We'll find out what's in my bug-out bag.
Bunga Bunga.
On maynard.com.au. AU!
On the 14th of June, our friends at the Canberra Skeptics enjoyed a lecture by Dr. Will Grant, a lecturer and researcher at the Australian National University and graduate studies convener at the Centre for Public Awareness of Science, otherwise known as CPAS. After his talk, guest reporter Kevin Davies caught up with Dr. Grant for this interview.
I'm here again at King O'Malley's Irish Pub, and I'm here with Dr. Will Grant from the Centre for Public Awareness of Science at the ANU. Hey, Will, how are you going?
I'm very well. Very good to come out and talk skepticism and have a beer with it.
Perhaps for our listeners, particularly for the ones overseas, could you explain a little bit about CPAS, what it is, what it does, where it is?
Absolutely, love to. So we're from, I'm from the Australian National Centre for Public Awareness of Science. We call ourselves CPAS, just because our name is quite a long one to say. We're based at the Australian National University. We're a small centre that does research and teaching on the intersection between science and society. So our teaching, our education is focused on giving science students and research scientists the skills that they need to go out and have a better connection between science and society. For some people that might be to understand how people will use their discoveries and tools. It might be to communicate their discoveries and tools, or it might be to understand what society might want. Or it might be to solve problems. For instance, if you're skeptics, many of you will be aware of the discussions and debates over vaccination or climate change or any of those kinds of things.
Very aware.
Absolutely. Well, we do research into why those things occur, how we might make a difference in those sorts of spheres. Then our research is there. It's looking at why these things occur, why, for example, different groups of people don't resonate with science, they don't connect with science, they don't engage, and how we might change that.
Now, you mentioned earlier that one of the ways in which you are communicating science is through some podcasts. Would you care to talk about those a little bit more?
I'd be very happy to. Look at this one. Well, I've done a few different podcasts and on a range of different topics, but the one that might be of most interest to your listeners is it's not out yet. So you're getting in at the ground floor here. It's called The Wholesome Show. Our goal there is really to look at the complex issues in the universe, in society, in the world, whatever's going on, and pull them apart. Now, we're very much going for a comedy vibe, but really trying to explore complex issues. So we're starting on July 13, and podcast listeners will probably see it in the week or two afterwards.
You said a we. Who is the second person in this?
That would be my partner in crime, I guess, or there's other words for Dr. Rod Lamberts. So we go by the moniker of the Vaguely Good Doctors. Our first episode is looking at one of us. We're trying to explore what it means to have a mainstream. Now, society has changed enormously with the advent of the internet. I don't know quite who I'm talking to here, but you could be in a range of different countries. And at the same time, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, many of us grew up in societies that had a sort of dominant culture. But that's disappeared, I think. Has it? Maybe. It's not there. It's a little bit there. It's changing enormously. We're exploring that from a sociological perspective.
Is there a website for that? Is there somewhere we can reach it yet?
Absolutely. You can go right now to wholesomeshow.com.
Okay.
The podcast won't be available until after we do the show. So July 13th for the show, and the podcast will be out in the weeks after that.
Now, you gave a talk tonight, didn't you?
The talk was on the relationship between critical thinking skills and scientific literacy and scientific education.
What's the difference between critical thinking and science?
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting question. Now, the first thing is you can't do science or good science without good critical thinking skills. But they're not the same thing. So critical thinking is the ability to understand how knowledge is produced, to pull knowledge apart and to say, okay, can we test that piece of knowledge and can we critically analyse whether it's useful or not, whether we can trust the sources, all of those kinds of things. Science uses a bunch of those things, but science uses other things as well. So the scientific process will be using a range of different techniques, depending on the discipline, to go out and collect new data, to analyse that data and find the patterns and those kinds of things. They're related fields of the human pursuit, but they're not the same thing. And the interesting question for us is that, is science the only way to teach critical thinking skills, or even the best way to teach critical thinking skills? We had a bit of a debate amongst friends, colleagues. Some of us came from an arts background, some of us came from a science background, and you can get critical thinking skills from a range of different places.
Well, obviously, when you said art, you're referring to, say, the humanities. What about the visual arts? Could a visual artist be a critical thinker?
That it really does appear that more education of any sort leads to better critical thinking skills. Now, the key thing there is that we didn't have a lot of visual arts people in our sample. We had a lot of different things. And I do wonder, just from sheer an implicit understanding of, okay, what's going on in the visual arts process. If someone is very highly educated in the visual arts process, I would say that they probably have pretty good critical thinking skills. Better and better to produce the work of art that they want. Are they thinking critically about, okay, say it's paint. They're thinking about, okay, what is going to produce the thing that I want, the depth, the colour, the range, all of those kinds of things. They're trying to test their own knowledge. Now, this is just really conjecture here, but I would guess that yes, even in something like the visual arts, which is not necessarily dealing with knowledge, but the more educated you are, the more that you're thinking about processes of production and education, the better your critical thinking skills are likely to be.
And how long was this research over, or what period of time?
This research was a large survey that we put out last year, where we collected 8,000 people and tested them against both their backgrounds in terms of the education they did and how they self-identified at schools and things like that, against their scientific literacy scores and their critical thinking skills.
But thank you very much, Dr. Will Grant.
No trouble at all.
You can find out more about the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science at CPAS, cpas.anu.edu.au. And remember to check with the Canberra Skeptics for their continuing series of talks throughout the year at canberraskeptics.org.au.
Did you see that UFO sighting that made the news? What did that latest study about alternative treatments really say? Is this photo making the rounds real or a hoax? Doubtful News is a unique website featuring news about pseudoscience, the paranormal, anomalies, and questionable claims framed with a skeptical view. Come visit doubtfulnews.com every day for news about cryptozoology, conspiracies, shams, scams, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Doubtful News. Critical thinking is essential in assessing today's news. Doubtful News helps you decide, can you really believe this stuff?
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and for those people who have written to me, Henrietta and Maud, the Skeptic Zone cats, are doing really well. They're right behind me now, in fact, in the studio. Hang on a second. They found a spot in the sun. Oh, they're looking at me now. Care to say anything to the Skeptic Zone fans? Yes, they're trying to eat the microphone. They're pretty happy, those two. And I think what they were saying there, as I can translate their purrs, I think what they were saying was that they hope some more people will sign up with the Patreon at skepticzone.tv and help support the show. I'm sure they will, you two. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, all right. Yeah, they're ignoring me now because, they're cats. Coming up on the Skeptic Zone, we're looking forward to the first report by our new reporter, Dr. Cassandra Perryman, and her section called The Cass Files. I'm looking forward to that. I think we might be covering a story some of you probably heard about, firewalking gone wrong. I've actually done firewalking. I did it with Dr. Karl Kruseniewski. It didn't go wrong for us, but I guess we sort of knew what we were doing. And we had a certain trust, shall I say, in the laws of physics. And just before I go, as you heard in the Skeptic Zone, don't forget to visit maynard.com.au for his wacky podcasts, including Bunga Bunga. I had the great pleasure, just last week, of being with Maynard and Tim Ferguson as we visited the Supernova Science Fiction and Fan Festival in Sydney. And I happen to know that very soon a new episode of Bunga Bunga will come out, and there will be a video that accompanies that, all about supernova. So keep an eye out for that by visiting maynard.com.au. But for this week, with the cats still ignoring me, this is Richard Saunders signing off from a very chilly Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter @Skeptic Zone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.